I threw a stick of firewood at the dogs and bade them quit their unholy howling, and waited. Undoubtedly, this liar of singular felicity would open his mouth and requite me for my St. Elias bear. "It was this way," he at last began, after the appropriate silence had intervened. "I was in camp one day—" "Where?" I interrupted. He waved his hand vaguely in the direction of the northeast, where stretched a terra incognita into which vastness few men have strayed, and fewer emerged. "I was in camp one day with Klooch. Klooch was as handsome a little kamooks as ever whined betwixt the traces or shoved nose into a camp kettle. Her father was a full-blood Malamute from Russian Pastilik on Bering Sea, and I bred her, and with understanding, out of a clean-legged bitch of the Hudson Bay stock. I tell you, man, she was a corker combination. And now, on this day I have in mind, she was brought to pup through a pure wild wolf of the woods, gray and long of limb, with big lungs and no end of staying power. Say, was there ever the like? It was a new breed of dog I had started, and I could look forward to big things. As I have said, she was brought neatly to pup, and safely delivered. I was squatting on my hams over the litter, 7 sturdy, blind little beggars, when from behind came a bray of trumpets and a crash of brass. There was a rush, like the wind squall that kicks the heels of the rain, and I was midway to my feet when knocked flat on my face. At the same instant I heard Klooch sigh, very much as a man does when you've planted your fist in his belly. You can stake your sack I lay quiet, but I twisted my head round and saw a huge bulk swaying above me. Then the blue sky flashed into view, and I got to my feet. A hairy mountain of flesh was just disappearing in the underbrush on the edge of the open. I caught a rear-end glimpse, with a stiff tail as big in girth as my body standing out straight behind. The next second only a tremendous hole remained in the thicket, though I could still hear the sounds as of a tornado dying quickly away, underbrush ripping and tearing, and trees snapping and crashing. I cast about for my rifle. It had been lying on the ground with the muzzle against a log, but now the stock was smashed, the barrel out of line, and the working gear in 1,000 bits. Then I looked for the slut, and what do you suppose? I shook my head. May my soul burn in 1,000 hells if there was anything left of her. Klooch, the 7 sturdy, blind little beggars, gone. All gone. Where she had stretched was a slimy, bloody depression in the soft earth, all of a yard in diameter, and around the edges a few scattered hairs. Measured 3 feet on the snow, threw about it a circle, and glanced at Nimrod. The beast was 30 long and 20 high, he answered, and its tusks scaled over 6 times 3 feet. I couldn't believe, myself, at the time, for all that it had just happened, but if my senses had played me, there was the broken gun and the hole in the brush. And there was, or rather there was not, Klooch and the pups. Oh, man, it makes me hot all over when I think of it. Klooch, another Eve, the mother of a new race, and a rampaging, ranting, old bull mammoth like a second flood wiping them, root and branch, off the face of the earth. Do you wonder that the blood-soaked earth cried out high to God, or that I grabbed the hand-axe and took the trail? "The hand-axe!" I exclaimed, startled out of myself by the picture. "The hand-axe? And a big bull mammoth, 30 feet long, 20 feet—" Nimrod joined me in my merriment, chuckling gleefully. "Wouldn't it kill you?" he cried. "Wasn't it a beaver's dream? Many's the time I've laughed about it since, but at the time it was no laughing matter. I was that danged mad, what of the gun and Klooch. Think of it, oh man! A brand new, unclassified, uncopyrighted breed, and wiped out before ever it opened its eyes or took out its intention papers. Well, so be it. Life's full of disappointments, and rightly so. Meat is best after a famine, and a bed soft after a hard trail. As I was saying, I took out after the beast with a hand-axe, and hung to its heels down the valley. But when he circled back towards the head, I was left winded at the lower end. Speaking of grub, I might as well stop long enough to explain a couple of points. Up thereabouts, in the midst of the mountains, is an almighty curious formation. There is no end of little valleys, each like the other much as peas in a pod, and all neatly tucked away with straight rocky walls rising on all sides. And at the lower ends are always small openings where the drainage or glaciers must have broken out. The only way in is through these mouths, and they are all small, and some smaller than others. As to grub, you've slushed around the rain-soaked islands of the Alaskan coast down the Sitka way most likely, seeing as you're a traveler, and you know how stuff grows there. Big, and juicy, and jungly. Well, that's the way it was with those valleys. Thick, rich soil with ferns and grasses and such things in patches higher than your heads. Rain 3 days out of 4 during the summer months, and food in them for 1,000 mammoths, to say nothing of small game for man. To get back. Down at the lower end of the valley, I got winded and gave over. I began to speculate, for when my wind left me my dander got hotter and hotter, and I knew I'd never know peace of mind till I dined on roasted mammoth foot. And I knew, also, that stood for Skookum Mamuk Pupakuk. Excuse Chinook, I mean that there was a big fight coming. Now, the mouth of my valley was very narrow, and the walls steep. High up on the one side was one of those big pivot rocks, or balancing rocks as some men call them, weighing all of a couple 100 tons. Just the thing. I hit back for camp, keeping an eye open so the bull couldn't slip past, and got all my ammunition. It wasn't worth anything with the rifle smashed, so I opened the shells, planted the powder under the rock, and touched it off with slow fuse. Wasn't much of a charge, but the old boulder tilted up lazily and dropped down into place, with just space enough to let the creek drain nicely. Now I had him. "How did you have him?" I queried. "Who ever heard of a man killing a mammoth with a hand axe? And for that matter, with anything else?" "Oh, man, have I not told you I was mad?" Nimrod replied with a slight manifestation of sensitiveness. "Mad clean through, what of Klooch and the gun. Also, was I not a hunter? And was this not new and most unusual game? A hand axe? Pish! I did not need it. Listen, and you shall hear of a hunt such as might have happened in the youth of the world when caveman rounded up the kill with hand axe of stone. Such would have served me well. Now, is it not a fact that man can outwalk the dog or the horse? That he can wear them out with the intelligence of his endurance?" I nodded. "Well?" The light broke in on me, and I bade him continue. My valley was perhaps 5 miles around. The mouth was closed. There was no way to get out. A timid beast was that bull mammoth, and I had him at my mercy. I got on his heels again, hollered like a fiend, pelted him with cobbles, and raced him around the valley 3 times before I knocked off for supper. Don't you see? A race course, a man and a mammoth, a hippodrome with sun, moon, and stars to referee. It took me 2 months to do it, but I did it, and that's no beaver dream. Round and round I ran him, me traveling on the inner circle, eating jerked meat and salmon berries on the run, and snatching winks of sleep between. Of course, he'd get desperate at times, and turn. Then I'd head for soft ground where the creeks spread out, and lay anathema upon him and his ancestry, and dare him to come on. But he was too wise to bog in a mud puddle. Once he pinned me against the walls, and I crawled back into a deep crevice and waited. Whenever he felt for me with his trunk, I'd belt him with the hand axe till he pulled out, shrieking fit to split my eardrums, he was that mad. He knew he had me, and didn't have me, and it near drove him wild. But he was no man's fool. He knew he was safe as long as I stayed in the crevice, and he made up his mind to keep me there. And he was dead right, only he hadn't figured on the commissary. There was neither grub nor water around that spot, so on the face of it he couldn't keep up the siege. He'd stand before the opening for hours, keeping an eye on me and flapping mosquitoes away with his big blanket ears. Then the thirst would come on him, and he'd ramp round and roar till the earth shook, calling me every name he could lay tongue to. This was to frighten me, of course, and when he thought I was sufficiently impressed, he'd back away softly and try to make a sneak for the creek. Sometimes I'd let him get almost there. Only a couple 100 yards away it was, when out I'd pop, and back he'd come, lumbering along like the old landslide he was. After I'd done this a few times, and he'd figured it out, he changed his tactics. Grasped the time element, you see. Without a word of warning, away he'd go, tearing for the water like mad, scheming to get there and back before I ran away. Finally, after cursing me most horribly, he raised the siege, and deliberately stalked off to the waterhole. That was the only time he penned me. 3 days of it. But after that, the hippodrome never stopped. Round and round and round, like a 6 days go as I please, for he never pleased. My clothes went to rags and tatters, but I never stopped to mend, till at last I ran naked as a son of earth, with nothing but the old hand axe in one hand and a cobble in the other. In fact, I never stopped, save for peeps of sleep in the crannies and ledges of the cliffs. As for the bull, he got perceptibly thinner and thinner, must have lost several tons at least, and as nervous as a schoolmarm on the wrong side of matrimony. When I'd come up with him and yell, or lain him with a rock at a long range, he'd jump like a skittish colt and tremble all over. Then he'd pull out on the run, tail and trunk waving stiff, head over one shoulder and wicked eyes blazing, and the way he'd swear at me was something dreadful. A most immoral beast he was, a murderer and a blasphemer. But towards the end he quit all this, and fell to whimpering and crying like a baby. His spirit broke, and he became a quivering jelly mountain